Insights.
This is Akashvani. In the program Insights, now we bring you a discussion on significance of critical minerals for global economies. The participants are Amitabh Sinha, senior journalist, and Rajesh Laikh, anchor.
Today we turn to an issue that will shape the geopolitics, green transitions and industrial strategies of the 21st century. Critical minerals and their significance for global economies. The backdrop is External Affairs Minister S Jaishankar's inaugural address at the Critical Minerals Ministerial in Washington, D.C., where he flagged the dangers of excessive concentration in a few geographies, called for de-risking supply chains through structured international cooperation, and highlighted India's national critical minerals mission, emerging rare earth corridors and support for the Forge initiative. To unpack what this means for India and the world, we are joined by Amitabh Sinha, senior journalist and deputy editor at the Indian Express, who has reported extensively on climate change, energy transitions, science and technology. Amitabh, thank you for joining us on Insights.
Thank you for inviting me.
Minister Jaishankar described critical minerals, Amitabh, as central to de-risking the global economy from excessive concentration and supply disruptions. From your vantage point of view as a reporter on climate and technology, what makes critical minerals so pivotal for today's global economy?
Right. So critical minerals are critical, and they are critical for a lot of uses, some very important technologies that are going to shape our future in next few decades. And primarily, two of the main drivers for the importance of critical minerals right now are energy transition and also the deployment of AI, artificial intelligence. Now, as you mentioned, Minister Jaishankar was speaking at the Critical Minerals Ministerial in Washington yesterday. Now, this is the first of its kind meeting wherein more than 50 countries actually participated. It was convened by the United States, and more than 50 countries participated in that, including India, to talk about, as you said, de-risking and creation of new supply chains or diversification of supply chains of the raw materials, these minerals, and also their refining, processing, and the final products. So this is something which is which has become very, very significant these days, mainly because these critical minerals, which I said are extremely critical for certain kinds of production and very, very important for the new economy, are right now concentrated the entire supply chains are concentrated in very few countries, and primarily China. And that is getting a lot of countries, quite naturally, extremely uncomfortable, because some of these things, almost 80% of some of these supply chains are now concentrated in one country. For something like, for nickel, for example, a similar kind of situation exists in Indonesia. For a lot of other minerals, most of cobalt, for example, and also a lot of other rare earth minerals, more than 80% of the concentration has happened in China. And obviously, to other countries, this is very, very discomforting, mainly because these minerals are extremely important for the kind of new technologies that we are going to deploy, particularly, as I said, in energy transition and in artificial intelligence.
So, as you said, we often hear that lithium, cobalt, rare earth and similar resources are the oil of the future. Could you explain in concrete terms how these minerals underpin everything from electric vehicles and batteries to semiconductors and clean energy, and what that dependence implies for growth strategies across countries?
As I mentioned, two things. One is energy transition that is happening because of climate change imperatives. What is happening is we are moving from oil or fossil fuel based energy sources to renewable sources, which is wind or solar and a lot of other mixes as well, biofuels, nuclear. So one is that driver that is present, which is causing large scale changes across the world in terms of how energy is produced and supplied. The other one, which is relatively recent, is artificial intelligence. Now, there are other drivers as well, but these are the two big packets, and other things are associated with this. So basically, new energy sources, solar PV, wind turbines, those kind of things, and artificial intelligence, meaning a lot of computing resources. So basically, huge amount of processing power that is required to run artificial intelligence, and also because of computerization of almost all the different systems, right from your airlines to your stock markets to almost every part of the economy, what is required is huge amount of computing resources. Artificial intelligence has only added to that kind of momentum. So what is required is very large number of computer chips, which is one side of the story. The other side is very large number of, let's say, solar PV cells. There are other things as well, but these are the two things which will be very familiar to our audiences. So let's see on both these fronts. And of course, when we talk about electric vehicles and other applications, these are all related part of the energy transition. Now, on both these sides, what you require is these kind of critical minerals, what are called critical. Now, these critical minerals are not new. They have been there. I mean, things like, cobalt or nickel, they have been in industrial use for a very long time. This is not something that they have discovered just now. But now their uses are proliferating, and their uses are being as we discussed earlier, in these very critical technologies which are going to drive the economy in the future, right? So on both these ends, so for batteries, for example, which run our mobile phones, but also batteries in terms of large scale storage of electricity. The electricity of future, the electricity that is produced from solar or wind, is not on-demand electricity. Solar or wind only produces electricity when the sun shines or when the wind is blowing. Now, there is this requirement of trying to store this electricity somewhere, mainly in the batteries, so that electricity can be provided on demand. Traditionally, electricity has been produced by coal or oil, for example, by burning a steam. These are on demand. So whenever you need it, you burn the coal and you get electricity, for example. With solar and wind, that is not the case. So you need batteries to store electricity. Now, for batteries, again, certain class of these kind of minerals are required. We are very familiar with lithium-ion batteries, for example. Similarly, for large-scale storage, there are other minerals that are required. Vanadium or nickel, manganese, all sorts of things are required for building these large battery sets. For semiconductors or chips, again, which we talked about, large systems are being deployed. You need silicon, you need gallium or niobium. These kind of elements are needed. So suddenly, these elements, as we said, have existed earlier, but suddenly they become very, very prominent because of their requirements in these critical technologies have increased manifold and is only going to increase further in the coming years.
Understood. So let's go back to what External Affairs Minister warned in Washington. He talked about excessive concentration of critical minerals in few jurisdictions. He also talked about de-risking supply chains through structured international cooperation. So my question to you is, what kinds of geopolitical and economic risks flow from the concentration that the minister was talking about, and how do we de-risk supply chains through structured international cooperation?
We had seen something like this during COVID, for example. What happened is, when you require something on a very urgent basis and you do not have it, and all the countries require the same resources at the same time. Countries which have those supply of resources, of raw materials and also production capacity, they are in a slightly better position than the others. And we saw during COVID how even for little things, smaller things, certain medicines or certain chemicals that were required for vaccines and all, because we did not have those capacities, or because the countries that we used to source those things from were also in need of those things, and suddenly we saw the supplies which during normal times would have been not a problem, became a problem during COVID because everyone was needing it at the same time. Now, with these kind of new technologies that we are talking about, mainly relating to energy, energy and computing. A similar kind of situation is emerging wherein, so there is no emergency, not a COVID-like emergency, but countries have strategic interests in running certain kind of systems, defense systems, for example, or their space systems or nuclear. And for running these kind of very strategic systems, you need a very reliable and stable supply of resources or raw materials. You cannot be entirely dependent, you cannot be held hostage to supply chains which are not entirely in your control. So the idea is to somehow diversify the supply chains so that you can source these things. You do not have to be dependent on only one country. You have multiple sources for raw materials. You have multiple sources for refining and processing. You have multiple sources wherein you can get the products that you need, so that even if one country is unwilling to part with, or because of whatever reasons, geopolitical, or if you don't have very good relations with that country, you can source these very essential, very critical items from other places. So that is what this de-risking and diversification of supply chains is all about.
Okay.
So that, as we discussed earlier, a lot of, whether you talk about solar PV or wind, for example, so that's the energy transition side, or whether you talk about computing resources, a lot of these things, solar manufacturing, solar from mining to refining and processing to, manufacture of solar modules, everything, the entire supply chain is concentrated very, very heavily in China. And so that is a problem. So the idea is to diversify. And then now the countries are coming.
Let it not concentrate.
Yes. So let's have multiple supply chains and everyone can benefit from that.
Also, Amitabh, India signaled support for the Forge initiative on critical minerals at the inaugural ministerial. From what we know so far, how could such a platform change the rules of the game for sharing information, investment and technology among trusted partners?
Forge is another new initiative that has come up, that was announced in Washington yesterday. So right now, what countries are doing is they're exploring different kinds of things. Forge is one. As I said, even the Critical Minerals Ministerial, this is the first ever this kind of meeting that has been called. Before that, we also heard about Pax Silica. Again, Pax Silica is slightly broader, not only focused on critical minerals, but also, IE and compute components and those kind of things.
But we also have the critical mineral diplomacy with Argentina as well.
Yes, we have been, as part of diversification, what we are now trying to do is to look at to secure our supplies of these critical minerals. So let's see where the mines are, and there are mines in India, for example, we'll start surveying and start mining those places. If those mines are somewhere else, certain minerals can be found in India, certain minerals would be in some other countries. So the effort has begun to start looking even outside to, say, Africa, to Middle East, to South America, to get these. We'll develop the mines, but we'll also source the material from there. Those kind of initiatives have begun. So countries, the Forge is just one of the several initiatives that people have started. Most of it is coming from the United States, trying to get countries together and start cooperating in different ways, so that these broad range of, we are putting it as critical minerals, but there are a lot of technologies on the back end that people are concerned about, so that countries begin to talk among themselves and to see how this can be declogged, so that there is no single country choke point on any one of these supply chains.
Amitabh, thank you for those wide-ranging insights into how critical minerals are reshaping not just supply chains, but climate action, industrial policy and geopolitics. Thank you, Amitabh, for being with Akashvani.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on significance of critical minerals for global economies. The participants were Amitabh Sinha, senior journalist, and Rajesh Laikh, anchor. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsttalks@gmail.com or WhatsApp on 9289094044.
Insights.